Nat Richards from Text on the Move here, and this is the first video that I've made in quite a while about migrating to Australia, which of course is what Text on the Move has been focusing on for motor mechanics and other automotive tradespeople for well over a decade now. But it's been a very difficult business to be in over the last few months whilst COVID-19 has been kicking our backsides, and it's been very hard to get in front of a camera and talk about migration with any sort of confidence that that the situation is going to change or improve, or what to expect out of things in the longer term, and try to give people some idea of what might be in store for them in the future if they're looking to come to Australia. So I thought it was probably about time that I sort of summarise exactly where things are at right now. I've been talking to people increasingly as other parts of the world sort of come out of the most severe stage of lockdown that we've had with COVID, and people are turning their attention again to what they want to do with the rest of their lives if Australia is on in their plans. So a couple of bullet points here, really just to sort of summarise things as it stands right now in August 2020. And of course, whatever I say here may not be the situation for that long, may not be the situation forever. It's really just a bit of a summary of where we're at right now, a bit of a frank assessment of what we expect out of the near future. So most importantly, unfortunately, Australia's borders remain shut to international visitors, and we expect that to be the case for quite some time yet still. So when we say that it's shut to international visitors, that means that anybody that is not an Australian citizen or a permanent resident or has a very close tie with Australia and an approved visa with a good reason why they can come back that needs to be demonstrated to the Australian government can't get in. It's as simple as that. Unfortunately, there's not really a whole lot of room for wiggle there. People have sort of said, surely there's something that can be done. No, unfortunately, there's not. It's really just a black and white open and shut case. That's all there is to it. Indeed, it's gotten more complicated than that over the last couple of months as well, as we've seen that particularly with Australia's COVID situation twisting and turning and interstate lockdowns becoming more difficult for us to navigate as a country. We've found that even Australians looking to return home to the country that they hold a passport in has become difficult as well. There's almost a queue sort of backed up of Aussies trying to get home, because simple things that we never really thought about at the start of COVID have become very difficult, like where are they going to observe a mandatory quarantine period? And what sort of conditions do we need to be mindful of whilst they're observing that? How sustainably can that be set up? Getting flights back has become challenging, not just in terms of are the planes in the air, but what sort of price is a flight home going to attract to an Aussie? And then, of course, what sort of cost is going to go along with the quarantine itself, because the Australian government has kind of had enough of paying for everyone's quarantine. So that's gotten quite complicated, and of course all of that means that the migration prospects for those who are not Australian citizens or permanent residents or have a valid exemption to come back to Australia for whatever reason is certainly not the Australian government's priority. Containing COVID is very much the Australian government's priority. So of course Australia did exceptionally well in that first kind of booming round of COVID, where we all had lockdowns to deal with through April and May in particular, and then where Australia was patting itself on the back thinking that we'd done a fantastic job of avoiding all of it. We had a pretty big spike open up in Melbourne that we're containing now, and it seems like we're getting on top of, but that of course has made the whole COVID situation a little bit more difficult to deal with, a little bit less predictable. It has of course this outbreak has come from hotel quarantine, which certainly doesn't help anything for migration either. So that's being investigated significantly now by the proper authorities, but ultimately it was failed protocols in quarantine environments that led to the outbreak in Melbourne that has spread beyond that to different parts of Australia, and we're now so desperately trying to get on top of. So that's certainly not working in the favour of anybody who's interested in coming here from abroad. More broadly, the migration system itself. So unfortunately, we've not really had any notice from the Australian government given about what they expect might change in the migration system that we've been working under. They've not talked about what sort of conditions might be different coming out of COVID. They've not talked about their goals and what they might be trying to achieve with their migration policy. None of that has been talked about at a public level, so there simply isn't any awareness of this beyond the government insiders themselves, and even then, frankly, it doesn't seem like it's really a priority for them, which is somewhat understandable, I suppose. The tricky thing for us is that the Australian government system that's put in place for migration is usually very closely tied to our financial year. So in Australia, of course, that runs from July 1 to the last day of June in the following year. We have a migration year that goes in step with that, and normally, in a non-COVID world, the Australian migration year, the government sets a certain amount of people that they expect to grant permanent residency visas to through the various visas that are available to get that done, and we all work toward hitting those numbers. It's a quota system. So that is done in line with the financial year, because the migration system, of course, is very finely tuned to try to balance Australia's economic productivity and output and well-being. So the Australian government basically pushed the announcement of our budget for the new financial year back into October, so still a couple of months away because of everything that's happening at the moment and the unpredictability that surrounds it. And then that means, of course, the migration year won't start until then at best. However, they've not pegged themselves to kickstarting a migration year in October by any stretch. It could well be beyond that, and we're not going to know until we get to that point. So even for those that are looking for permanent residency visas, it's impossible to say at this point what the future might hold for that system, and indeed if there will be further changes to it, which seems likely, really, if anything, because of course in a post-COVID sense, the economy is going to be very different and presumably much more fragile than it was going in. And demand from Australian businesses as well is something that's going to take a bit of time to understand across all of the different occupations that system is made up out of. So it's not just motor mechanics or diesel mechanics, automotive electricians and panel beaters, which would be the core that we focus on. There's so many more occupations than that. It's not funny. And the government, I'm sure, will take their time in assessing exactly where their priorities might lie if they're going to recalibrate anything. So the bottom line out of all of that, and I know this has been going for a long time, so apologies if you sat suffering through it. The bottom line out of all that is that as much as it frustrates all of us, it's a bit of a waiting game for us. So Techs on the Move isn't going anywhere. We are continuing to do migration work here on the ground in Australia with people who are already in the country for the most part, and we'll keep chipping away at that. So we hope to come out of the COVID period doing what we do and helping out as many people as we can, but ultimately our hands are tied at the moment, and all we can really do is wait for further notice from the powers that be. And of course, as soon as that all comes to light, we'll update everyone that cares about what we do through forums just like this. So please stay in touch, keep us in mind, keep an eye on what we do. We'll get the word out there just as soon as we can, and hopefully better days ahead. Bye.